Hello there. Chen is a pretty popular conservative commentator. She is actually the person responsible for starting my interest in politics. Our ways have parted a long time ago. I think the last video I have seen from her was when she still was a classical liberal. But as I was browsing YouTube, I stumbled upon a video called Far Left Pragery, the Gravel's Institute Socialist Propaganda. It was a reaction video, predictably, but the thing is, Lauren got so many points wrong in this video that I really had to react. Before we begin, I want to say two things. Number one, this is my first video ever, so sorry about the content quality. I would be glad if you gave me any feedback on what I should change. Thanks. Number two, I have nothing against Lauren. I don't watch her content, therefore I can't know what kind of person she is. Let's begin then.
But regarding what the video had to say about PragerU, though, we hear all the time from the left that PragerU lies. They just straight up do not tell the truth. This is exactly the same sort of thing that Samantha Bee said about PragerU when her show took a shot at them. And look, I have no problem saying that no, I haven't agreed with every single PragerU video I've ever seen. And if you're someone who is progressive or just generally on the left, I can very easily imagine all of the disagreements you would have with PragerU. But for all of the allegations I've heard of them lying, of PragerU just not telling the truth, I have seen zero evidence to back that up. I haven't really seen anybody be able to point to a specific video and a specific statement to say, hey, this is not true, this is factually inaccurate, and here's why.
Holy moly, is that a bold claim. You can literally type into YouTube PragerU debunked and you will find dozens of videos done by either leftist YouTubers or just normal non-political folks that address their lies and misconceptions. There is even a video debunking your PragerU bit, Lauren. In the description I have left a link to a playlist of PragerU videos getting annihilated. I wonder why Lauren is so comfortable putting out such an easily disprovable claim like that. If she thinks that her viewers are sheep who will follow her no matter what. I myself would hate to have such an audience.
And I love the irony, by the way, of the side with George Soros and all of academia in the palm of their hands, accusing others of being funded by billionaires to indoctrinate people.
First of all, academia is largely unbiased. Second, even if we assume that it is true that every leftist has two paychecks, one from Daddy Soros, this is still a tu quoque fallacy. Not only that, it is also implying that because we are hypocrites, which we are not, we are wrong, which is a false idea to begin with. Just because we are paid, which isn't true for most leftists, does not mean PragerU isn't paid by billionaires for propaganda, and you trying to skew the focus will not change it. My problem isn't that the PragerU is getting paid, it is who pays them. One of the most famous contributors to the PragerU cause are the Wilks brothers. They are billionaires who have made their fortune by fracking. Considering the juxtaposition of PragerU claiming that fracking isn't bad for environment and getting paid by fracking billionaires, I don't think it's hard to see that they might not be honest.
It seems like this particular group's only real tangible issue with PragerU is that they are effective in promoting right-wing ideas.
1 out of every 3 Americans online has seen one of their videos, and 70% say that Prager's videos changed their minds. This stuff makes a difference, and every day it is pulling people toward the right.
Pulling people toward the right. Ooh, how scary. I love the dramatic music behind all of this. You'd think he was discussing the spread of white supremacy or something instead of just lower taxes, smaller government.
The problem is that PragerU isn't just pulling people towards any kind of right, it is pulling them towards the alt-right. As it can be easily demonstrated, many of PragerU's videos are factually wrong. They provide incorrect conclusions to many issues, and the conclusions can be dangerous, as they get people to fall into the alt-right pipeline. And that can end badly for not just them, but also folks around them. Good example of how these ideologies can be dangerous are countless attacks by radicalized people. Most of terrorist attacks in America were done by right-wing extremists.
This just goes to show how terrified the left is of right-wing ideas, because deep down, I think they know that if the public discourse was actually free and open, right-wing ideas would be dominating.
If you actually want more public discourse, why not go out and debate actual prominent leftists, e.g. Vaush, Jungle Science Lot, Shuonhead, etc. I think it is actually the right-wingers who are afraid. Stig Jackson Hammer 666 refuses to debate BreadTubers. John Doyle covered from a debate with Walsh, and don't forget the fact that right-wing media like PragerU encourage their fans not to debate leftists.
But the progressives, of course, can't have that, so instead they do things like bully conservatives into silence. They strong arm their way into academia and corporate culture.
Academia agreeing with us isn't strong-arming. It is completely stupid to think that we pay academia. Scientists aren't wealthy people, except for those who get paid by conservative billionaires and oil/coal companies to falsify data, of course.
PragerU presents mainstream conservative ideas as well as just classically liberal centrist ideas.
PragerU also promotes straight-up lies which cause people to stray further to the right, sometimes even too far. They create a space for radicalization built on lies. That's why we leftists dislike them.
In fact, some of their presenters are actually liberals.
Liberals, Pepe. Also, liberal does not equal leftist, so this does not help your point.
This group is explicitly anti capitalism, and I know the Overton window keeps shifting left, but if you ask me, that is still an extremist and fringe position to have.
By the stars, criticizing capitalism. God forbid anyone ever criticize our deity. Everyone who does that is a fucking commie and deserves to get shot. I find it funny that right-wingers call us leftists a cult, yet they are ones acting like religious zealots, with capitalism being their god, simping for it all the time. Capitalism isn't perfect, that's a fact. We leftists, unlike right-wingers, try to do something about it. For example, I, as a social democrat, think that capitalism can be fixed with a good welfare. Funny enough, PragerU getting paid for their propaganda by billionaires is one of the problems.
With that kind of background, it should come as no surprise that the topic Gray chose to do her Gravel Institute video on is why big government is good. Actually, let's watch.
Sure, the US government is big, but not as big as it used to be. As a percentage of the economy, federal spending is smaller now than it was in 1954.
So this video starts off trying to convince you that big government is good, actually, by asserting that government now isn't even all that big to begin with. And even though they're not technically lying in this segment, it is one of the best examples of misinformation I have ever seen. Gray says that the federal government actually isn't as big as it used to be, pointing to a specific figure in 1954. So if the government isn't as big as it used to be, then clearly that must mean that the government is actually getting smaller all the time, not bigger all the time like those lying conservatives like to say. Right? Wrong! This is totally wrong, and I'm going to use the same source the Gravel Institute does to prove it. As you can see on this graph, found at usgovernmentspending.com, starting in the year 1900, US government spending was very, very low. But then it understandably peaked during World War I. It went back down again, then gradually started rising in the late 1930s, eventually peaking again and dwarfing any previous spending at the height of World War II. After the war was over, spending fell down again, but it had a slight resurgence in the 50s. I.e., the year that the Gravel Institute conveniently chooses to compare present-day spending to. So yes, technically it is true that there are points in history in the past where US government spending was more than it is today, but that doesn't change the fact that the overall trend throughout the past century of government spending is that it gradually increases.
Yeah, that's not what Gravel Institute is trying to say. It's true that it is increasing as the annual GDP is also increasing. This can be seen in many other nations like Germany or United Kingdom, for example, which Lauren actually explains. But if you have eyes, you can see that the graph of US government spending has a hill in the years 1951 to 1954. Compared to that, the spending has actually decreased. Coincide that with what she is saying in the part of the video that Lauren does not show you.
So, why does everyone agree that the government doesn't really work for us? Conservatives have an easy answer. Big government is the problem. They say the government infringes on people's freedoms and is constantly getting bigger. They say that if we just defund expensive government programs, we could lower taxes for the average American. With that money back in the hands of ordinary people, they say, people could handle their problems on their own. But there's a big problem with that. It's just not true. Sure, the US government is big, but not as big as it used to be. As a percentage of the economy, federal spending is smaller now than it was in 1954.
You can see that what she is trying to say is that government size has had a small effect on the well-being of the country. That's just it. Lauren is right here. as her video is truly one of the best examples of misinformation I have ever seen.
And the US spends less on government than other countries, like Germany or Finland, that have lower rates of poverty and higher rates of economic mobility. The American dream is more alive in these big government countries than in America.
There are a lot of differences between the US, Germany, and Finland. But if you ask a socialist why it is that Germany and Finland perform better than the US in certain metrics, they'll say it's because the government is bigger and the taxes are higher. That is the answer to prosperity. Is that right though? Are higher taxes and big government really the answer to Germany and Finland's success? It couldn't possibly be because they have overwhelmingly homogeneous populations, right?
Laura states that Finland and Germany have overwhelmingly homogeneous populations. She of course means by race, but I wonder how she knows that, considering that neither Finland nor Germany have official studies regarding the race of the population. They use very different metrics for classifying their people, partially due to the fact that whiteness is not a good metric. Whiteness itself is a social construct. If you don't believe me, consider the fact that Irish weren't considered white 500 years ago by the British. I'd recommend a book to you called How Irish Became White if you want to learn more about the topic. People often ask me if we can't just look at the skin and classify folks based on their looks. Let me give you a test. Would you consider this person white? Maybe no. But in Germany, this person would be considered white, as Moroccans, Tunisians, and people from North Africa generally are considered to be white by German people. From this, a question arises: who should be considered white? Where do we draw the line of whiteness? I have never seen a single conservative or a right-winger give me a reasonable answer. I, as a leftist, of course have an answer for that, and that is to abolish whiteness and stop giving a damn about race whatsoever. No, abolishing whiteness does not mean killing white people. Whiteness has been used as an exclusionary factor in many cases throughout the history, whether it was British calling Irish non-white to be racist towards them, or whites discriminating against blacks. I think we'll all live in a better world if we stop being obsessed with race. I would like to give this point a closure, therefore I will do my best to compare these countries. Luckily for me, the US has actual statistics on amount of whites in the US. We now put together the amount of ethnic Germans and migrants from the Europe. We get 73% of whites in America and 89.8% of quote-unquote whites in Germany. I know this is stupid as I'm pretty much mixing apples with oranges, but let me finish. This is not that big of a difference, and even if it were, it wouldn't make a difference, as there are many studies about how racial diversity isn't bad for countries. In the description, I will link to a meta-analysis of 90 studies that prove that diversity does not actually hurt social cohesion.
Populations that, by the way, also have a higher average IQ.
You serious?
There is just 1 point IQ difference between Germany, Finland, and the US. I really have no idea what is she trying to say here. This is not that big of a difference. This means nothing. If we are to be logocentric, however, I would like to ask Lauren what she, as a Christian conservative, thinks of the fact that religious people have on average lower IQ by 6 points than non-religious. Oh, and by the way, I know it's due to the fact that religious people usually live in poorer conditions, have lesser access to education, and lesser exposure to electronic media, which are factors that increase average IQ. But Lauren didn't explain why Germans and Finnish have higher IQ, so I don't need to do it myself. Also, consider the fact that Denmark has the same IQ as the US, yet it is objectively better at the things that were named in the video.
Have a higher average IQ and narrower distribution than the US does.
I am not sure what distribution Lauren means here. If it is, well, then I agree. Income equality is better for societies. That is the reason why we need to tax the rich and uplift the poor. If Lauren believes this, it is a pleasant surprise to me. If she means population distribution, or in other words, population density, this is also false, as Germany has 232 people per kilometer squared compared to the US with 36 people per kilometer squared. Literally just Google this.
If it was true that you could just big government and tax any population into happiness and success, then the story of the Soviet Union would be very different.
Wrong. Soviet Union had just 10% of its income coming from taxes. Even during war times, the tax didn't contribute to more than 20%. The US had bigger tax income at the times, about 50%. Even if this was true, this is still a strawman. Gravel Institute is not promoting any kind of a big government. After all, Nazi Germany also had a big government. As with everything in politics, the idea is just not enough. It has to be implemented correctly. There are a lot of examples of this working. Almost entire Europe has some kind of increased taxes to pay for example, healthcare for all. I personally feel that Scandinavian countries have it the best.
The reason it feels like our politicians don't work for us is because, well, they don't. Republicans and Democrats alike are working for the people who line their wallets instead. That's not just my politics. That's the academic consensus.
Okay, so I don't actually disagree with what Gray is saying here. I do think that politicians, by and large, are in it for themselves. They're in it to make money, and they're in it to stay in power. And I think that governments the world over cater way too much to special interests. But the thing is, that's just the nature of government, which is why conservatives like myself want government to be as small as possible so that people can't take advantage of it. And I've just never understood how people like Gray can acknowledge how corrupt government is, yet at the same time lobby to make it bigger and to give them more power. I think they're under the naive assumption that government and government workers can just be this benevolent force in it for the good of humanity, but that's not realistic.
Lauren does not state this directly, but it is clear that she thinks that the only way to stop corruption is to make government as small as possible. This can be simply disproven by Denmark. One of the scary socialist countries with scary big government was recently placed at number one on the list of the least corrupt countries in the world, based on the CPI. To be fair, I really don't understand how conservatives and libertarians can vouch for small government with small restrictions on the economy, when it is exactly this that allows rich individuals to gain unhealthy amounts of political influence. Government is like a firearm. It can be used to kill or it can be used to protect. With the right people at the helm, a country is bound to become better. This can be said if half of American politicians are puppets of the rich. Therefore, to keep political power in balance, the rich should be taxed more to keep their wealth at a non-dangerous amount.
Seems like no matter how many times the socialists and the communists get it wrong, they always think that no, if they just try again, if they just put different people in power, this time it could be different. But it's like, guys, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, it's gotta be at least 7 or 8 times now with failed communist regimes, shame on me.
Gravel Institute is not directly advocating for socialism, neither for communism in this video. This video had nothing to do with economy.
In the 1950s, when the economy was growing faster than ever, the richest people in the country paid an income tax of 91%. The corporate income tax was above 50%. But after decades of tax cuts for the rich, the 400 richest Americans pay a lower tax rate than the bottom 10%.
Now, this part of the video is just blatantly untrue. Despite what progressives might keep saying, it's just not the reality that the poor and working class out there are paying more in taxes than the wealthy. And since I'm no tax expert, allow me to share this piece from the Heritage Foundation. It says that, quote, using data from a new book by Berkeley economists Emmanuel Zayes and Gabriel Zucman, i.e. the people the Gravel Institute cite, the Times claims that the tax rate on the highest income Americans was 23% in 2018, falling below the tax rates of all other income groups. To get this result, they had to cook the books, systematically inflating the income of the richest Americans without also increasing taxes and leaving out important transfer programs for poor Americans, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, which can more than offset the cost of the payroll tax for some with low incomes. The most recent IRS data from 2016 shows that the top 10% of income earners pay almost 70% of federal income taxes. Additionally, looking at all federal taxes, the Congressional Budget Office shows that the top 1% pay an average federal tax rate of 33.3%. The data also shows tax rates decline with income, and the poorest 20% of the population pays an average tax rate of just 1.7%.
Lauren states that the statistic is false, yet there is academic consensus around the statistic. As a counter-argument, she presents an article from the Heritage Foundation, which states that the top 10% paid 70% of taxes. How is it possible that two different sources have arrived at such a different conclusions? Well, just like Lauren, I am no tax expert, neither an economist, so rather than trying to find fallacies in either of the claims, I looked at who is making them. As it turns out, the Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank funded by billionaires with conservative views and many conservative funds. They are also climate change deniers, likely because they are getting paid by a company called ExxonMobil, a company notorious for funding anti-environmentalist groups. If this does not make them lose credibility, then I don't know what will. On the other hand, both Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zachman, the authors of the study, are both university professors and economists. I haven't found anything regarding them being paid to spread certain beliefs. It is now up to you, dear viewer. Who are you going to trust? A group working for people who would be hurt by increase of taxes on the richest, or independent economists?
While American workers have become dramatically more productive, their wages have stagnated or fallen. The average hourly wage was higher in 1974 than it was in 2018. This has led to a stark gap in qualities of life.
I always find it funny when socialists try to blame stagnant wages on capitalism, because it really does just go to show how little they know about economics. Which, I mean, we already could have guessed based on them being socialists. Like any other commodity, labor, especially low-skilled and hourly labor, is subject to the law of supply and demand. And although socialists might not like to hear it, capitalism isn't to blame for stagnant wages. It's immigration. For example, if I'm a makeup artist and I'm the only makeup artist in town, I can pretty much charge whatever I want to do other people's makeup because they don't have any alternatives to go to. But then, say over the next couple of years, scores and scores of other makeup artists start moving into town and taking on jobs. Now, all of a sudden, the amount that I'm able to charge people to do their makeup drops dramatically because the supply of makeup artists has increased. This is exactly what mass migration, specifically mass low-skilled migration, is doing to low-skilled laborers in America and so many other Western countries. And if we want this to stop, the answer isn't to dismantle capitalism, it's to have some freaking border controls, some immigration restrictions.
Lauren's last claim is flat out wrong. There is no serious academic consensus proving that immigration is hurting wages. In fact, the opposite is true. In the description, I link you a study from National Bureau of Economic Research at Cambridge, which proves that immigration actually has positive effects on the wages, both short term and long term. And that's it. It was quite alright. It wasn't that hard, since most of her claims could be disproven by a simple Google search. I wish that more people would fact check their sources, as people like PragerU or Lauren Chen do have a political impact on the population, even if they themselves do not mean bad, but I think in the situation with Lauren. Yet most of their content is easily disproven. Most liars don't put much effort into their lies. They have become too comfortable with their following being but a herd of sheep. I encourage all of you to take this opportunity to show them that they need to get much better at lying. I am going to end this with a more positive message. If you are a Lauren Chen fan, I don't want you to stop being her fan. I merely want you to consider the possibility of these people having an agenda and realizing the impact they have. If you want to be a conservative or a libertarian, you can be. You most likely have freedom of thought after all. But do not tolerate anti intellectualism and don't use lies to spread your agenda. Thanks for your attention.